Perfect. Hello and welcome everyone to Funding Digital Rights, hosted by Urgent Action Fund for Women's Human Rights. Urgent Action Fund is a feminist rapid response grant maker resourcing human rights and gender justice movements for over 20 years. My name is Bella and I'm the grants officer at Urgent Action Fund, and it's absolute pleasure to open this panel session today discussing funding digital rights with my feminist funder colleagues. Before I introduce our moderator and panel speaker for the session, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping notes. First, this session is recorded and interpretation is available. So interpretation in languages of Arabic, English, and some session in sign language. So hopefully this session is interpreted into Arabic because we will be speaking in English. And I ask our speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters. So if you can keep that in mind for the next hour and a half, I will be kinder to our interpreters. And to our guests, if you have any access needs, please let me know in the chat and I'll do my best to accommodate. And we have reserved 25 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A. So please save your questions and comments in the chat section, and then our panelists will get to it at the end as time allows. And now my favorite part, which is to introduce our speakers today, and it's my absolute honor. First, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this session, Lina Habib, who is the director of Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship at the American University of Beirut. She also teaches undergraduate and graduate gender courses at the Faculty of Arts and Science at the American University of Beirut. She serves as the chair of Collective for Research and Training for Development in Action, and as a board member for Gender at Work, as well as MENA advisor to us at Urgent Action Fund, and the strategic advisor for Global Fund for Women. She's also a member of the editorial board of Gender and Development Journal published by Oxfam, and is a strategic advisor for Durya Feminist Fund. She has considerable experience in qualitative research, gender analysis, and training and facilitation. And next to our colleague Nadia, Elboubkri is a feminist activist from North Africa on a journey to explore and enhance the transformative power of young feminist movement building through support and governance, community building, safe and security, and care. Nadia is currently based in Tunis and working with Rita Young Feminist Fund and supporting Durya Feminist Fund. Next, our colleague Senda Ben Jebara is a queer feminist from Tunisia, currently based in Montreal, Canada. She presently holds the role of Program Officer for Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East at Australia Lesbian Feminist Foundation for Justice. Senda has been involved in political organizing and in feminist and queer movements for the past 10 years. Next, Jack Zemke is a feminist activist working at the intersection of internet technologies, social justice, and collective power. Jack is located within these movements at hyper-local, network, and global levels. Among stuff, Jack is proud of being part of and is co-founding the Take Back the Tech collaborative global campaign on ending online gender-based violence, stewarding the collaborative development of the feminist principles of the internet. And Jack is currently making it into reality with Co-Dreamers in the Moon Fund, the first dedicated fund for feminist technology in and from the Global South. And last but not least, my colleague Elsa Saade, who is a Lebanese cultural and social activist, aspiring historian, political artist, mobilizer, and program officer at Urgent Action Fund. And she's based in New York City. Her interests include skills around the fields of feminist human rights, digital security, advocacy, Middle Eastern history, politics, activism, artivism, philanthropy, and justice. I hope you enjoy this session and come with many questions and curiosities into feminist philanthropy. And now I'd like to pass the microphone to our moderator, Lina, who will be facilitating us through a rich discussion with our panelists. Thank you, Lina, and on to you.
Thank you, Bella, and thank you for the introductions. I'm incredibly happy to be with all of you, but also particularly with my dearest friend, Elsa, from whom I learn every time we talk or every time I see her, which is not much. And I was telling Elsa, actually, it's It's a little bit funny that I get to moderate a session on technology when I'm a total Luddite. So anyway, I hope you bear with me. But from being in the MENA region and from being a feminist activist in the MENA region, what I have learned and also experienced is that oppression and our long and rich history with oppression and authoritarian regimes has shown that, our regimes are actually incredibly adaptable. So they use the same tools of oppression, whether offline or online, and they have been faster in controlling the virtual space, actually probably faster than us, and they have controlled it in the last 20 years in various ways. Through close monitoring of civil society, particularly of feminist groups and particularly of queer groups, through basically, deploying massive electronic armies to attack feminist activists and queer activists, and actually to figure out all sorts of ongoing smear campaigns against people, to simply making sure that the system, the system itself, the infrastructure is broken, such as Lebanon. Actually, the only reason I'm able to speak to you today and things are functioning is because, I'm at the university. So it's a very unfortunate situation where, with the closure of the civic space, of the material space, the same tactics of intimidation and oppression are employed in the virtual space. Hence, the importance of our discussion today. And we have a few questions, but I don't want these questions to be really binding. So please, feel free to address them, or feel free to go tangentially if you feel there's a compelling point that you need to share. Let's remember, as Bella said, this is a safe space. So, and we shall all respect this safe space. So please, contribute and share with us. So basically, I would like to ask the first question to my four colleagues. What does funding digital rights? How do you define, or how do you perceive, or how do you frame funding digital rights within your own organization? Has this changed throughout the years? Maybe as the youngest fund amongst the group, as Doria, we have started with the initial idea to fund knowledge production and strengthening, making the digital space safe is one of it. But I'm really interested to know, what does it mean for my colleagues here, given that they're coming with a longer history of funding digital rights and seeing trends evolving in this. So perhaps I would start with Senda from Astrea.
Thank you, Lina. So as Astrea is a feminist organization, and we fund specifically LGBTQ groups and organizations across the world. Our funding model is a flexible model. We offer core flexible funds, and it's not necessarily directed towards digital rights specifically. However, in this complex era where the lines of digital and physical are very blurred, we undertake more of a holistic approach to funding, obviously. We are constantly listening to our grantee partners and investing time and effort in understanding their contexts, their challenges, to also be able to provide support that is catered to these needs, whether that comes in funding or beyond funding. However, throughout the past years, we also have had a lot of communications, and we've led a lot of research pieces that also allowed us to complement our core grants with more specific and additional support. And that comes obviously in the form of capacity building grants, emergency grants, but also strategic communication grants. And these are obviously very important to supplement the core support that we're providing, understanding that also many times when we're providing core support, it goes to fill in certain gaps that are definitely important, but it does not always prioritize capacity building and emergencies, because there are so many different needs. And it's important sometimes to also add some specificities to these grants to make sure that our grantee partners are prioritizing certain aspects of the work that is many times put aside because of the lack of resources. So this is kind of our funding model in general. And I just also wanted to give an example of how we've been funding digital rights. One of the groups that we're currently funding in the MENA region is a group that is mainly online, mainly digital. It is represented in a kind of a platform that is open and that is a safe space for LGBTQ users. I will not disclose the name of the group for security reasons. However, they've really done an incredible work in creating such an amazing platform to bring people together from across the MENA region, and have really prioritized specifically digital security in this platform and data protection, which is a lot of times not something that is prioritized in the digital space.
Thank you, Senda. And when you say prioritizing digital security, it takes me back maybe 15 years in the region when you couldn't think about where the risks come from. And we were working with also a Syrian women organization that I cannot name as well. But one day they came to their office and their computers were taken by the police, as simple as that. So how do you anticipate the different ways in which you are at risk is really a question. Nadia from Frida, I want to ask you the same question. How is funding digital rights framed by Frida, and how has this evolved throughout the years?
Thanks, Lina. So Frida Young Feminist Fund provides resources to young feminist organizers all, in the Global South. While we operate in a participatory grant-making model, we rely heavily on the community of applicants to actually support us to understand the different priorities and how the context is changing by actually voting on who should receive the funding. And so in this case, when we are opening up our open call for applications, the funding is really going towards the most urgent needs, the most pressing needs that the community determines. But in addition to that, once we have our grantee partners sort of onboarded and in the Frida community, we rely heavily on our open lines of communication with grantee partners to understand the context that they're operating in, their needs. We provide special grants and capacity strengthening grants that are also flexible funds and can be used for reinforcing or building infrastructure to support digital security, to support any other holistic security needs that grantee partners might have. And this has all been a huge learning experience for Frida as well, as we are trying to strengthen our own internal structures and our own internal processes and protocols for how we communicate with grantee partners to make sure that we're also taking on a level of safety and security to not put them at more risk. And that's still an ongoing learning for us, and we're really on a very comprehensive journey in our own digital security and holistic security infrastructure in general. And yeah, I guess I would say that in the last few years, there have been a special focus on digital rights and digital organizing because of COVID. And we found, just to give an example, that even when we had to sort of shift priorities because of COVID, we were still able to find different ways to shift the priorities in our funding. So groups that had received travel grants from us, we worked closely with them to repurpose those grants to use them for online organizing, to use them for reinforcing their digital security needs and tech infrastructure. So that's also been a way that we've kind of learned and adapted in the changing context.
Thank you, Nadia. Certainly, repurposing traveled grants has been, the trend amongst most women funds. But also, your strategy to rely on intelligence, on information, on the insight from the community is certainly one important way to go about it. Jack, it's lovely to see you again. It's been years and years and years. Could you tell us also from the perspective of the Numun Fund, and I think you're the only fund that actually focuses just on technology. What does it mean to you? And maybe also as a new fund as well, how do you define funding digital rights, and why did you set up a fund just for this, which I think is great initiative.
Yeah, hi Lina. It's really great to see you again as well. It's been a while. And Numun and Doria Fund, I think we're set up maybe around the same time. I remember seeing Doria Fund and I was very excited. I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. And also I love the logo. I'm like, oh my God, look at how cool the comms are.
And Doria, the woman who inspired.
Yeah. It's amazing. So we really, even though it's not a new idea, it's definitely something that a bunch of us have been thinking about and coming at it from different directions. So I've been a feminist tech activist and movement organizer for more than 15 years. One of our co-founders, Ezra, who's supposed to be here today, she has also been a developer and founder of Majal for 17 years. And Nasuya has also been working on technology for many years, from different perspective. And we've been sitting and having this conversation about where is the money for feminist tech work, really? And I've come at this from really trying to raise funds for it and really trying to always make that bridge, trying to connect between those who fund technology work to say feminism really matters and those who fund feminist work to say, hey, technology is really integral. So we're okay, middle of pandemic, it just became very obvious how much the movement relied on technology as infrastructure for our organizing and how much it's a blind spot to us actually in terms of both strengthening our own capacities to think about how we integrate this more firmly into our work and into our movement organizing work, as well as understanding also how to kind of budget for it and fundraise for it and see this not as a luxury or as part of comms, but really as part of movement infrastructure work. And the timing just felt we're all here sitting going, we can't move, but we still have to organize because the threats and the disparities have just blown up in our faces. And this is something we really, really urgently need to do. So that's basically the kind of the catalytic moment where everything just swirled together. And we got into conversation with Alex from Prospera and Maria from Women Win, people who have been doing women's fund work to just be really incredible thought partners to figure out, okay, the time has come. Let's just do this. Let's have a fund that's just dedicated to feminist tech and from a movement perspective and really focused and led by, activists working in this from the larger world or global south. And then that's just what we're going to do now. We're going to intensify and focus on this. So our first call will be next year. We aim for our first call to come out in the first quarter, early March or April 2022. So this year has been fundraising like crazy. I'm learning so much. So I have a lot to learn from everybody who is sitting here about doing really incredible work around participatory grant making and doing work around feminist funding. And that's kind of what we're doing right now, learning and trying to, understand what's happening in the field, deepening that a little bit more, and also understanding we have a commitment to participatory grant making. So we're also really trying to understand the different ways in which to do this and what we can begin to experiment and explore with in our first phase. So that's everything that's happening right now. We hope to be able to distribute 1 million next year in like that's, yeah, we hope. And we want to really be able to provide at minimum, like we would like to be able to provide holistic grants to feminist tech community to really grow the network, to build the movement and to strengthen their work, to support connections between activists and approaches and movements, and supporting also the ability to meet. So how do we meet and how do we convene? Thinking about also digital spaces as a meaningful space, and what does that mean? Like spaces like this, and then dedicated technology grants for women, trans-led, and feminist organizations to integrate technology into their work. And the hope is that we will start to be able to create an environment where we can create technology that we need, like really like feminist tech for the world we want. Like enough of already of trying to fix broken technology and like make it work like, yeah. Let's do it. I think that's
do it ourselves.
That's the aim. That's the aim.
Thank you, Jack. And really what you're saying is amazing. The fact that at the end of the day, the pandemic showed us that this is where to go, which, yeah, absolutely right. And I want to turn to my friend and colleague, Elsa, for her take from the Urgent Action Fund on, what does it mean for you, and what has been how has it evolved so far?
Thank you so much, Lina. And I'm so happy that I'm in the very end, because I'm able to see how many of us are here and how stronger we are with our diversity. Like, I know that Astrea, Frida, Numun, Doria, and UAF are working on very similar terms, but in a very different way, filling in gaps in so many different ways. So I'm so happy to have heard all of this before I came in. Just to put it forward, I'm a person with a brown skin tone and big curly hair. I have black eyeliner on, wearing round brown glasses, a round earring, and a wine turtleneck with a predominantly pink jacket over it for those who can't see me. And I will say that since 1997, UAF looks at security holistically. So physical security is incomplete without emotional and digital security ever since we've started. And in the nature of UAF's work, we do rapid response grants to resource the resilience of human rights and gender justice movements by supporting the security and advocacy interventions of activists when a swift response is needed. So anything that is extremely urgent, that is budgeted for, we fund. So basically, we fund the digital security trainings, infrastructure, and access at times of urgency. For instance, during protests, when internet shutdowns were happening, partners were ready with infrastructure we supported them with. When attempts of character assassination and defamation happened, to WHRDs or women human rights defenders online, because of work that they do, partners were ready to counter campaign, etc. So we've showed up at times of urgency when needs that were unbudgeted for came up, and most times digital security issues are quite last minute and reactive, unfortunately. And we've been able to provide support within days from application. So I think rapid response for us is a key intervention when movements are facing risks when it comes to digital security. And digital security and digital rights are a very core issue for us, given that our framework is based on a holistic approach of seeing security of human rights defenders, women, trans, and non-binary folks. So that's in a nutshell.
Absolutely. And, I like what you started with, which is basically looking at security holistically. And often, if you're not safe as a woman or as a non-binary offline, you're certainly also not safe online. They're really connected. So I think this is a very important point. You mostly have addressed this, but can I just ask each one of you, in a nutshell, to basically make the link between, funding digital rights and contributing to building the feminist movements around the world. If you could just unpack this a little bit for me, and if I can ask, how shall we do it? Let me start with Senda again.
Thanks, Lina, for this question. As an intersectional feminist organization, funding digital rights comes really naturally at Astrea as part of bigger ecosystems and thematics that continue to intersect with LGBTQ rights, which is our main focus, especially when funding LGBTQ rights, where criminalization remains quite widespread in many regions, and more specifically in our regions. Many groups and organizations shift toward the digital space for more safety, anonymity, but also for more reach. So in that holistic approach that we take in our funding, it becomes really clear that it is impossible to tackle only one part of the problem or one part of the solution as well. So we look at things really from a global perspective. And moreover, the digital space has really allowed the creation of webs of solidarity, connections, cross-regional collaborations, and also it has become more evident today that social justice movements have really taken the digital space and exploited it to create and build strategies to rally people together and to really make a change.
Absolutely. And you know what you said just reminded me, because the digital space is, I take the example of Lebanon, and probably Elsa remembers this unfortunate event where the church mobilized the digital space against a queer artist, actually, and you know, created violence. And so what you say has become even more so important, because you know, our battles are not just on the street as intersectional feminists, but also on the virtual, in the virtual domain. Jack, how can you know, what are your thoughts about the same question?
Well, I think when you sort of cast a feminist lens, or when you sort of take a feminist approach to anything, it's really about paying attention to power. And as you know, in the example that you're giving, no, and feminism to me is really the project of unpacking, dismantling, and shifting power. And at the very basic, you start with unpacking patriarchal power, but it doesn't stop there. It's also about understanding racism. It's also understanding sort of disabilities and colonialism and all of these different sort of structures and systems of power. And the feminist project is really about unpacking the shit out of it. Sorry. And when you kind of connect this to resourcing and technology, is then funding tech from this perspective means that we understand the complicity of technology in the, you know, in either propping up certain particular structures and systems of power, or the possibilities of breaking this down. And I think that's essentially what it is. How do we then cast this lens to understand that technology is complicit? Surveillance tech disproportionately impacts specific types of bodies. Pleasure tech is really focused on specific forms of pleasure and excludes others. No, discourse and control. And when you have a feminist lens to it, you understand that sexual speech is always political speech. So I think that is that's the magic that we kind of bring into funding this work, is really shifting the focus and where we first begin the conversation and what we want to transform.
And I think this is very powerful, unpacking, dismantling, and shifting power wherever you are as an intersectional feminist. Let me move to Elsa.
Thank you, Lina. Jack, you put it so beautifully.
Yes.
A really fantastic way of saying this, because I really think we believe the same. You know, at UAF, we believe in feminisms to start with. And when I think of that, I'm thinking of intersectional feminism, which really informs how I see digital rights from a framework that acknowledges the how and why, the multiplicity of experience and reasoning behind the threats based on oppressive systems that intersect in their oppression, whether it's ableism, sexism, capitalism, patriarchy, apartheid, etc. Right? So when I fund digital rights from that perspective, I'm funding the folks who dismantle systems of oppression on many fronts. That's the way I see it, right? So for instance, I don't just think of surveillance leading to the imprisonment of a human rights defender only. I think of the structures that have allowed for an entity to be able to surveil a human rights defender. I think of the resilience of a grantee partner to dismantle that power dynamic by protecting themselves from surveillance, right? I think of how important digital security is in making sure the physical and emotional security of the human rights defender is secure and strong enough to thrive in their activism, to dismantle those systems and sustain. So I'm not just thinking of privacy or security as a right. I'm thinking of them as a vocation. Guaranteeing digital rights is like one path towards justice for me. That's the way I see it. That when I'm thinking from a feminist lens, it's one step towards the dismantling of systemic oppression through guaranteeing the resilience and sustainability of activists on the front line. And that is what a feminist perspective has provided me when I think of digital rights or digital security or supporting a human rights defender working on issues, whether related to digital rights or not, right? So that's the way I come to it.
Totally. One step to dismantle oppression. Absolutely. Nadia, Elsa, we lost you. Or at least we can't see you. But anyway, maybe it's by design. Nadia?
Thanks. And I think my co-panelists have really captured a lot of what I also feel in this regard. But I would like to add that I think it's really important to consider how our role as funders in the philanthropic space, and not only passively fund digital rights and supporting young feminist activists in reinforcing their infrastructure internally in tech and digital security and things like that, but to really do it with intention, to have specific structures and processes within our own organizations to understand and then resource their needs, but also to use our privilege and our access in the philanthropic space to be able to advocate for more resources to go specifically to digital rights and tech infrastructure for young feminist organizers.
Totally, using our privilege and our access. And, recently, this is where we felt we need to do something as a feminist fund when Israel attacked human rights organizations and basically described them as being terrorists, and then making sure that this narrative goes throughout. I think one of the things that was needed and happened online was to counter this narrative definitely from a feminist perspective, but also it showed the different layers of power that all of you have talked about, and the ways that, again, I mean, for me at my age, I can't help but see the trends offline being reproduced online. So this is incredibly empowering what I hear from you. And can I push the discussion a little bit further in terms of, we talk about our feminist principles and we talk about our feminist principles guiding our work wherever it is, whether it's in academia, whether it's in activism, and whether it is as a women fund focusing or at least targeting particularly the issue of digital rights. So is it possible to unpack what we mean by what you feel are feminist principles that are reflected in your work when you fund digital rights? And perhaps now I could start with Jack.
I feel like I possibly answered it in the previous question, but a big part of the work that I was doing previous to Numun Fund was really working on the feminist principles of the internet with a whole group of diverse actors. Sort of thinking through what would be the feminist principles of engaging with technology. And I think that the iterative and kind of nature, and also the way in which the work and the principles have really evolved through conversations with different movements in many parts of the larger world. It's been a very useful framework for us to also begin thinking through, okay, so if we wanted to fund technology from a feminist perspective, then let's also look at all of these different areas and how do we use them as guidelines, not to build from what has already begun, to sort of be part of that journey, as opposed to thinking we are sort of creating new things from nowhere. I think that's it's kind of that's probably where I would take the first step.
Again, for me, it's a learning journey because the space itself is so challenging. So bear with me. Senda, can I ask you to reflect also on the feminist principles guiding funding digital rights?
Absolutely. First of all, I think it's really important to acknowledge how underfunded our communities are, and to also recognize the lack of resources that are available to them. Astrea is really committed to listen to the communities that it serves, and to also trust that they are best equipped and positioned to come up with their own solutions. We believe in the do no harm principle, and we're really committed to providing core, flexible, and sustainable support to our communities. But also to be very flexible also with our deadlines and changes to kind of adapt to the context that our grantee partners work within. And we definitely value also building the relationships and creating several and different communication channels with our communities, and focus more on trust and solidarity. We also really acknowledge our positionality as a global North-based funder, and also our lack of understanding of the challenges on the ground, no matter how hard we try to, obviously, and also in the importance of safety and protection of activists who are working on the line. It's definitely our responsibility to ensure that we are present, that we are responsive, and that we are aware of the security risks, and to make sure that our systems, both internal and external, are as well as our communications are put in place to make sure that we are not harming our communities, and that we are responsive to their needs whenever these needs arise.
Senda, can I take this further and ask you for an example? And I think this is incredibly important, that we trust people we work with, or people we want to work with, or people we have identified, feminist, intersectional feminist group that we have identified as, people we want to work with and support. What do you think, can you give us an example of what people have identified as, this is an area of risk, this is what we need, this is our priority, this is how we can safeguard ourselves?
I mean, it definitely comes in different shapes and forms, and it really is different also from one context to the other. As I was mentioning, as Bella was mentioning, I'm a focal point for the region of Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East. And the contexts are definitely very, very different in all of these three sub-regions. And definitely identifying the risks in each one of these regions or countries is quite different in each one of them. Examples, I don't have necessarily any examples in mind in terms of how some of the grantee partners identify these risks, but we've definitely supported grantee partners in doing, for example, monitoring of social media or news to kind of identify the trends of how LGBTQ rights are perceived and how they're addressed, to be able to also build their own strategies around how to counter certain dialogues or certain push from certain communities, whether it's the government itself or it's part of the anti-gender movements, or it's part of people within their own circles as well. But what we definitely constantly try and do is to be up to date with the different contexts that we're working in, to constantly be doing research pieces in whether it's landscape mapping or identification of the global risks that are present in our LGBTQI communities, to be able to really identify all of these risks and be able to support the communities in building strategies around them and countering them.
Absolutely. And because otherwise I've just seen a post today on social media by a friend who's a queer activist, who's speaking for their friends who have to leave the MENA region. And the fact that it doesn't stop there, that actually the risks are still there, that the vulnerabilities some vulnerabilities maybe are mitigated, but some new vulnerabilities arise. And it's fascinating. And how do we keep up with all this is actually, I think, a question that haunts us all. Elsa, I want to move to another question. We've all mentioned think everybody on the panel mentioned the impact of, and particularly Jack, I think, that the pandemic was like, this is it. It was, a wake-up call. This is it. How do we reclaim this space? The importance of this space, a space that has been actually, if, again, the virtue of age, you see things for a long period of time, a space that has been invested by fundamentalists, by, ISIS has been doing most of its recruitment online, all of this. So for you, Elsa, the realization and all the, the realization that the pandemic has brought to us, the fact, the importance of the virtual space and the importance of the security of feminist activists in the virtual space. How did you shape and reshape, your own intervention as Urgent Action Fund to respond to this quite quickly? Oh, Senda, it's good I'm at the university and none of my 11 cats will move in front of the screen. So how did you react to this? How did you make sure that, this is what's happening, it's very serious? How do we respond? How did this happen within UAF?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Lina. And in fact, I think the pandemic really highlighted how important it is for us to be flexible, for us to be fluid, for us to know when to change and when to adapt to the situation that is around us because of how fast things can change and how fast needs can change, right? So I can definitely say, based on our reading of the past 2 years, that they've been extremely hard for specifically women, trans, non-binary human rights defenders. We've received calls about folks wanting to die by suicide increasingly this year. And that probably has a lot to do with a decrease in physical organizing spaces where folks normally connect underground and organize. And of course, with increased surveillance, digital organizing has also been increasingly hard. So WHRDs, THRDs, and non-binary HRDs have been very isolated, but particularly those in exile as well amongst them, right? Like, imagine the layers and layers and layers of isolation when the digital space is not accessible to you or not safe enough for you to organize or to speak or to be there for one another, right? So I think at UAF, we really shifted our way of looking at how we do grant making during the pandemic, and we really expanded our criteria so that more people would be able to submit requests and be able to get support. And a lot of those requests were a big amount of those requests were about digital security or digital rights, just generally, for people to organize together or for people to get access to Zoom, be able to pay for that service in order to be able to connect and participate with others. So I think that's where the added value of flexibility and fluidity came in. And that is a very feminist kind of perspective into things, right? Looking at the nuances, looking at the very particular context, looking at how things change so fast and so swiftly, how much less resources we have or our grantee partners have compared to governments who've bought millions and millions of dollars of worth of surveillance tools, etc. Right? So I think that's the most thing that we've seen during COVID-19, and that's the way we've dealt with it at UAF, really.
Exactly, and I've just what you just mentioned. There's a brilliant report by Daraj Media for those of you who are interested in, and it's in English as well, about a country like Egypt receiving millions and millions of money from France for surveillance equipment and for equipment that will be used directly, to undermine, oppress, imprison, torture, people. So that's what, what you're talking about, the fluidity and the rapidity and all of this becomes incredibly important. I want to ask Nadia the same thing in terms of Frida. How did this shift happen? What was your thought process?
At Frida, we definitely wanted to understand how we can take on the responsibility to protect our community and ensure that we're not putting folks at more risk in a time when, there are so many uncertainties. And so we really went on a journey to understand and co-create a process with our community to secure, firstly, our communication, our technology, which meant a lot of big changes internally, changing processes, capacity strengthening, training and everything for staff, but also sharing those learnings, sharing excuse me, opportunities for capacity strengthening with our community, and really having an interactive process and dialogue really between Frida and our community to strengthen the bond, strengthen our communication, and definitely strengthen our tech infrastructure. This has made a huge difference, firstly, in our grantee partners feeling able to come to us with specific ideas, with specific issues, being able to communicate them in a safe way, and also feeling that we are going to be responsive enough to make changes that we need to be able to support them best.
Great, indeed. Jack, Numun Fund, same as Doria Fund, basically were created during the pandemic. So I don't think we know any other reality. What are your, so I can't really ask you the same question, but I just want to, I just want to ask you if you have a reflection to share with us about, creating a fund during the pandemic about funding digital rights.
I think there's a few things that sort of like a few realizations that came on. No, one is that we really realized how critical and how central technology was, but it wasn't really only just about being able to access technology, and it wasn't only thinking about there is always, as feminist activists and queer activists, you're always preparing for issues of risks and very specific kinds of attacks because of your gender and sexuality. Always. That's almost like your landscape. But then now added to it is you're not able to move. So all of our practices and all of the care that we've placed into thinking about coming to agreements, building consensus, dealing with conflict, thinking about how to adapt our strategies as things come, all of these things that we're used to doing in the face-to-face or in different kinds of spaces, we now have to think, oh, how do we do this when we can't be in the same room? How do we do this when we are exhausted being online and Zoom calls all the time? How do we do this when our banking system has collapsed and it's so difficult to even get money out? How do we do all of the organizing and movement building practices when one part of our infrastructure is and when I say infrastructure, it's not only just that Zoom is a terrible platform for us to do most of our things, and it really is. And we have so little alternatives. It's not only just that, it's also about the human and relationship infrastructure that we have, how that has shifted and what is our practices around it and the protocols. And I think that's the thing that we really, that is different about wanting to fund technology from a feminist perspective also. It's really understanding this, that it's not separate. It's really part of who we are as movements, right? And I think what's also happened with COVID is the movement's really tired. Many of us are tired and exhausted, and it's been really hard. It's been hard. And then the last couple of years just made it harder, even more hard. So then we almost have to think, well, how do we fund, tech and movement organizing in this context of a tired, exhausted, traumatized movements? And how do we think about funding things that's also about healing, that's also about pleasure, that's also about trying to evoke this different energy of that creativity and imagination brings, no? When you think how to in this landscape, how do we just make that space for just playing a little bit with each other and be okay, relax ourselves. What Elsa was saying about being flexible and what Nadia was saying about, listening to what movements and communities need. How do we also make this then space in relation to that? That's about playing. That's about not expecting what we know will come next. And I think that's the puzzle that we're really also trying to figure out in this moment. And it's something that I'm sitting with and very hopeful for. How can Doria and Numun as new funds also then sort of, be able to create spaces for new forms of inquiry, maybe, or different forms of engagement with technology that that doesn't begin like this, no? Because we often come to technology kind of like we're bracing, but just kind of begin with a different body posture, maybe. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, yeah, I can. Jack, I have to tell you again, I really missed listening to you. It's so empowering and inspiring. It's just amazing. And I'm really thankful for our UAF friends for bringing us together. Do we have time, Bella, for just a quick round? Because I know that we have to open the space for questions. But can I just ask you now, in this moment? Sorry, I'm shifting from our initial scenario, but now at this moment, if you have the resource you need as a fund, what would be your priority for funding digital rights? And I want to start with Senda. If resources was not an issue for you, where would it go?
I mean, personally, I've always had this dream of kind of whenever we start funding a group or an organization to kind of provide a package, you know, with all of the digital security tools and skills that they might need. We would offer a VPN, we'd offer additional security emails with custom domains, we'd offer obviously antivirus and licensed things, you know. I know that at least for me, when I was back in Tunis and when organizing, we didn't have money. We were kind of downloading things off the internet that were unlicensed, and we did not have the resources to basically invest in proper licensing. So I think like I would really create this package to make sure that security, whether digital or physical, is provided to our grantee partners, because when we offer core grants, most of the time this is not prioritized. Unfortunately, there is again a lack of resources that is incredible, that we tend to not prioritize our securities. I mean, not me, but back when I was an activist, I am in a different position, which I absolutely acknowledge as well. But there is definitely a tendency of activists not prioritizing their security, and I really wish we could provide packages to make sure that they do. Yeah, I think if I did have the resources, that would be definitely something that I would want to put a lot of efforts into.
Great, I think, and I definitely agree with you, Nadia.
Can I cheat and say two things? First, probably I would resource, because I don't have the capacity to do it myself by any means, building a huge, secure, and environmentally friendly feminist server where we can just host everybody in the world.
I can't imagine what this could be, but I think it's a great idea still.
Was it right? And but more realistically, I think it would be great to also, you know, acknowledge the importance of holistic security within digital rights, and how that really makes, you know, brings to the surface accessibility, it brings to the surface inclusivity, safety, security, care, all of these things, and so just really like. Enhancing, you know, adding a bit more meat to our grants and to our funding to activists to make sure that it does include all of those things.
Great. Can I move to Elsa? And I know you had a point from the previous question. So it's okay to address, to go back to the previous question and then address this one.
No, it's okay. I mean, it could be addressed. It could be addressed at a later point as well. I would say, let's shut down the internet. I'm kidding. I am kidding. Okay, so I'd say in my wildest dreams, I would go back to every single grantee partner we've ever had as UAF, and hopefully as all of our grantee partners as feminist grantmakers, and just like have a profile for each of them based on their needs and be able to provide it to them, all of us, you know, like make a huge, you know, collection of everyone we've worked with, all the movements that are in need of support and sustaining themselves, and just mapping out their needs and being able to provide all that needs, throughout, sustainably, not just like once in a lifetime, rather sustainably, and adapting to the differences that are going to happen throughout the times that will come by. So I'd say that's the thing for me. And given that I said that, I will highlight from the previous question the fact that grantee partners tend to think that there are a lack of resources, that they're unable to ask for things from their funders, and that is a complete big misconception. I think grantee partners need to know that they have the agency to ask for things to change. They have the agency to inform their funders what they need and what they want, which will eventually inform the donors of those donors what they need and what they want and what needs to be funded. And I guess I will link that to philanthropic advocacy and maybe create spaces for us to talk amongst ourselves as well. On our collective principles, our collective feminist principles in supporting digital rights, or rights just generally, holistically, as Nadia was saying, and as every single one of us was talking about. So I'd put those resources there.
And Jack?
So I have a lot of money, right? Like all the resources in the world. Fantastic.
It's
okay, so this is what's going to happen. This is what's...
think like Jeff Bezos. You have enough money to go to the moon with a weird-looking spaceship.
That is just the most disgusting thing I can think. Like, I can't even begin. Like, this fucking white boy is going to the fucking moon when we are stuck. Like, I cannot. Okay, sorry. I'll just stop now.
Without water, without electricity.
I apologize for my, actually, I do not
don't. Please don't.
Okay.
This is our space. It's a safe space.
So this is what I would, this will be like one of the awesome things that could possibly happen is where we open up a bunch of like kitchen labs in different parts of the world. So these kitchen labs will bring together like, activists, economists, tech developers, artists, fiction writers, bunch of people to sit down and really think about what is the alternative economic model we can design for this technology reality that we are in right now. And then let's think about this alternative economic model and prototype some of it. So we build some of the technologies, we play with it, we prototype the relationships, we figure out some of these different pieces. And then they will all be like, they'll all be hosted in Frida's feminist server, of course, and using all of the tools that Senda has also developed. So this is all definitely also feminist economy in the making, and we're talking to each other. And then it will actually have the resources to go beyond the prototype level to also forge collaboration and creation and adaptation and adoption, and it'll be distributed, it'll be diffused, and it will also have the kind of sustainable relationships that is also able to kind of think about that is about an economy that isn't just reliant on either capitalism or, sort of this particular relationship of philanthropy and funding, but what could be the alternative economy where things like Bezos could not happen? It's impossible. Not possible. Elon Musk, forget about it. No.
Yeah.
So I think that would be great.
Jack, you need to lead our revolution. You need to.
Absolutely. And also we need to clone you because, yes, we have the virtual space, but we need you physically in different places. We have one question, which I would like to, ask differently. So one of the people in the audience is asking, what are some challenges that you have experienced when it comes to funding organizations working on digital rights in MENA? And I want to add to it, how did you address this challenge? So not just the challenge, but, and maybe go back to Elsa.
That's a very, very good question, which I'm sure the other panelists will sediment over what the basic thing I'm just going to say. And it's really, I think the main challenge I've seen personally at UAF was a lack of women, trans, non-binary voice leading the conversation on digital rights. There's a huge gap that I've seen. That is one big challenge that I've personally been facing in the Middle East particularly. Another thing is the fact that it's always reactive, constantly, and very rarely proactive. So we get more requests in regards to needing support to stop a hacker from hacking into someone's account right now, or like some digital security training that needs to happen post a certain risk that had already happened, or someone facing a travel ban because of their conversations being out there, rather than someone wanting to proactively protect themselves, right? So that's another big challenge that I've seen in terms of the requests coming in. What else? I'll stop there for now, and I'm sure others will come through with more thoughts. And if I have more thoughts, I'll add them, of course.
But again, it reminds me of the challenges offline. Being reactive rather than proactive, limited voices of women, trans, and non-binary. I mean, virtual life imitates offline. Senda, can you think of challenges specific to the MENA region and how you've addressed them?
Yeah, I can think of a couple. One is obviously the governments most of the time. I won't name the specific countries, but I think we all kind of know which are the specific countries that are kind of really closing on the digital space for activists, specifically mainly working in the digital space. And the second one is definitely the harassment and the bullying that a lot of the activists are actually facing when they're specifically working on the digital space, which is kind of all of the organizations that we're funding at this point. Like everyone has somehow a very big presence online, especially in the past year and a half, I would say. How we would address them, I mean, that is a hard question. It's not always easy to kind of come in and counter the government. But again, as I was mentioning earlier, we're doing a lot of research. We're trying to really support communities with building their own strategies through different skills and tools. Some of the tools that we've used, or like the skill provision that we've given, is through the strategic communication grants, but also through the Comms Labs, which is basically kind of a space where people come together and learn more about communication, media, and technology, and like develop skills around that. And again, we've really supported groups with building these skills to monitor more the online space and also physical space around them, to be able to create strategies and to counter all of these forces that are coming at them most of the time.
Thank you. And Nadia, I'm sure you've had this situation day in, day out.
Yes, and Frida has a lot of scenarios in the same way as UAF and Australia, but I would take a different sort of lens here to share that one of the challenges is there being so little funding directed specifically towards digital rights and specifically for the MENA or SWANA region. And as Frida is a fundraising organization, we have to fundraise the money that we provide for grant making. That's really clear all the time, that there isn't anything specifically, or there are very few specifically directed towards digital rights and towards the MENA SWANA region.
You made me remember Nadia and Senda, actually, about Tunisia. You folks probably were still very, very, very young, but remember when WSIS was happening in Tunisia, and it was supposed to be the space for technology to bloom, and every single thing was policed, and everybody who said, maybe Ben Ali's hairdo today is not so good was either deported or thrown in jail. So, it's nothing has changed much, I have to say, except that we're still around and we're still contesting. and new generations are also even more so vocal and more so lucid in their contestation. And that's why I want actually Jack to actually, be our wise person and just tell us your thoughts about the future. We know what the challenges are and we're trying to deal with them. And you've spoken to us about your dream of the kitchen labs. What society we want, what economy do we want? And, I'm pretty sure, we do have the answers and we do have models to test. What would you say to the young, emerging feminine and intersectional feminist activists, MENA and beyond, about how to organize now with the context of the pandemic, with the conflict in regions that are always constantly in and out of conflict, with, kind of dramatic economies? What would you say?
I don't really know what to say. And actually, I'm sort of really curious also, what are some of the practices that are emerging? I think sometimes the most challenging contexts becomes the spaces where there is the most amount of creativity, and invention, because you have to, like, you either invent or you die. And so you sort of then, it becomes this like, amazing space where so much creativity and invention happens. But I think what's then challenging is we don't always see it. Because of course there's always disparity everywhere, even within the region, even within a very, very difficult region, there is disparity within, and that there are some spaces, and because of what Senda was also alluding to about different governments having putting different kinds of pressure to different communities. So you also have some people who are able to be present in spaces like this, and some who are not. So I think also the question to ourselves, I guess, is figuring out then how do we think about being able to put the light on some of these inventive spaces, right? Like how are we able to see them, to kind of like surface and learn from it, and resource the sorts of creativity, sort of get outside of our own expectation or assumptions on how some things should work or shouldn't work and needs support. So how do we also sort of give ourselves that space to go actually, what are we not seeing, and how are we able to understand more, I guess. And I'm really curious I'm really curious to hear also from people who might be listening into this session right now, how have you had to invent, especially how have you had to kind of the sorts of unlikely collaborations that you've had to make in order to be able to ensure that things are flowing, that there are resources meeting to different spaces. What does that look like? What is that model? And so how can we then also figure out how do we then use our privileges or ability to flow resources to then support this and strengthen it a little bit more? I think that's sort of answering a question with a question.
It does, totally. And it circles back to what Senda was saying in terms of learning more, understanding more, investing more in the research. And one question that I keep asking myself, particularly in the MENA region, why do the oppressive regimes, why do they fret so much? Why so much huffing and puffing, despite all their resources, all their armies, all their weapons, all the money they get for surveillance? Why, why are they bothered? Why are they bothered by activists? Why does it, and the more I think about it, and the more I think about how overreactive they become, and how, of course, this all comes at a cost because people lose their lives or their livelihoods or whatever. But it must mean that somewhere it's about them feeling, or at least I hope to think so, that actually feminist activism is live and kicking, and feminist activism really bothers them, which can only be good, I think. So on this note, I think Bella, if you allow me, I just want to ask it is fragile. It is totally fragile masculinity, as Senda was saying. Totally, it is about these men with big guns, but who are incredibly fragile, poor things. So let's let's keep pointing out to this fragility. So Bella, with your permission, can I ask our panelists to say one last word, and then over to you. And if you would allow to say, this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I hope we can continue to have it, and we can continue to, at least, I think this space in and of itself is incredibly empowering. This exchange is empowering, and this is such an amazing learning curve, at least for me. And somebody has to tell me what a bot is at some point, but nevertheless, but I mean, I'm really, really grateful for having had the opportunity to moderate this conversation with amazing feminists. So maybe Jack, Nadia, Senda, Elsa, and then Bella, your last words. Jack?
I guess, like, even in this last words, I guess, I don't know, I guess it's just kind of like a call to allow ourselves this even when things are really challenging and really difficult, some space to play, like really figure out like what is our politics of play. And I think play can be a really interesting space that could help us be creative without necessarily being productive, because that's also quite painful. And I think that one thing is that, like, Numun's really new. We have a serious desire to learn, and we have a serious desire to really figure out what is, how we can meet our mission in the best way possible. And so we really, like, I'm super open and super curious to figure out more from everybody who's, like, from Frita, Australia, and UAF, of course, and, from Doria, but also from everybody else who's kind of like the kind of on the ground, like, what are the inventiveness and what has been the need and the challenges. And I think, this is really an open, what is it called? Like an open request, like, if there's things you think we need to learn, please do get in touch. Like, we're in this serious desire to understand.
Thank you, Jack. Nadia?
Firstly, thank you for this space. It was really wonderful to speak with you all. And I'm just really inspired by just in this small space, within this huge ecosystem, how much knowledge and power and intention there is to really invest in the feminist movement space, and especially in digital rights. So if this small group is doing this much, imagine how much we can do in the whole movement space. So thank you all.
Thank you so much. And Senda?
Yeah, thank you so much, UAF, for organizing this, and thank you, Lina, for beautifully holding the space, and for everyone in it as well, panelists and people who are attending. Just wanted to kind of also reiterate our responsibility as funders as well to our communities, to our movements, to serve them and to resource them, but also to do all that is in our power to make sure that they're safe and that we provide them with all of the safety and security tools that are possible, to make sure that they continue to do the amazing work that they're doing and to do it safely.
Thank you so much, Senda. Elsa?
I'll echo everyone's thoughts. Really, it was so inspiring to be with you all in this space. Thank you for being here. I'd say my final words. I'll echo what Shalini, our Deputy Executive Director, wrote in the comments: technology as infrastructure for our movement work. And I think every single one of us is doing that in their own way and within their organizations. I'll also say this is a call for whoever's listening to reach out and to know that we're out here to hear and listen to you. Know that you can affect where our funding goes. Know that you can really ask for what you need, and know that it's an open call. all throughout the year. And maybe I'll highlight with that with UAF, you can visit our website, urgentactionfund.org, and you'll be able to see our grants and our criteria. And please let us know if you have any questions, reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to talk more about anything, especially digital rights. I'd love to talk more about it. And also it's a call for all of us to keep this space going, to really keep this conversation going amongst us, because I felt so inspired by you, Jack. I felt so inspired by your thoughts, Senda, and that package that you were talking about. Yes. So inspired by you, Nadia, and the work that you've been doing with Frida, with feminist principles on digital rights for so long. Same goes for you, Lina. I can't wait to see both Numun and Doria grow and prosper. So yeah, let's keep this conversation going.
Thank you all. Again, my thanks to our wonderful friends at Urgent Action Fund for bringing us together, and over to you, Bella.
Yeah, wow, what's such an incredible conversation, and I'm just so humbled and energized from this conversation, and I've learned so much, and I think my knowledge has expanded so much from all your brilliance. I'll go ahead and close out this session, even though I don't want to. I think we've come to an end, but I hope we can have this conversation. We can keep it going. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's been so rich. It's been so amazing to talk about funding digital rights from a feminist perspective. And I want to give so much love and appreciation to our speakers who shared their brilliance with us. And of course, thank you so much for Lina for facilitating us through such an important topic and really guiding us through these complex conversations with such clarity and reality. And it's funny, although we can't clone any of our speakers, as has been suggested, I have hope that there are many of you who are listening that's doing incredible work in your communities. And there's no need to clone any of us because we have you all. And I ask you all to lead your own digital revolutions, and now you have 6 new friends in the feminist philanthropic space as your resource and ally. So you all have amazing support system, and please reach out to any of us. And thank you all again, and have a wonderful rest of your conference. And I hope to see you all online and offline. Lina, do you have any last minute thoughts before we close out?
If I turn my on button now, it's going to go forever. So I just want to say thank you again, everybody. It has been an absolute pleasure, and we should do this more often. Would be my last thought. Thank you again, Nadia, Jack, Senda, Elsa, and Bella. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you, Smax, for the space as well, for creating the net. It's a lovely space. Thank you, Mohammed, Jessica, and everyone who's been working, Musa as well, everyone who's been supporting us in creating these spaces. Thank you so much, Smax.
شكرا جميعا. شكرا كتير.